Welcome to the Cover 4 podcast. I'm Nolan Kangas alongside Bradshaw Furlong, Jeff Wall, and Luca Moia. Guys, tons to get to today, but before we do that, we are going to recognize David Crosby, obviously formerly a co-host of the show. He will no longer be with us. It's just a time in David's life where he is busy as hell. Right, he's got a lot of other stuff in the works that he's trying to do, and also he's getting prepared to get married as well. So I think that takes priority than just our little podcast here. So we do want to thank David for all the hard work he put in the first couple shows of getting the Cover 4 podcast up and running. So David, thank you for that. But guys, let's dive in. Sam Darnold traded to the Carolina Panthers, 3 picks there. The big pick, obviously, is going to be next year's second rounder, I believe, which will be just more picks for the Jets and that kind of new rebuild that the New York organization has going for them. But let's talk about Sam Darnold, right? Tough career there in New York. It was kind of a disaster, and he never really had enough help. Obviously, it's really tough when you have Adam Gase as a coach because he was a nightmare. That offensive line really, really struggled. They obviously did get a piece last year, Mekhi Becton, who looks like he's going to be a cornerstone of that line. But the weapons never really helped him out either. Now it goes to Carolina's situation where the offensive line is sort of similar to what it was in New York. They made a lot of questionable decisions this offseason, but the weapons are a major, major upgrade. And obviously he's going to have a partner there in the backfield with Christian McCaffrey, who's one of the best running backs in football. So let's go to Bradshaw first. Obviously, you see Carolina quite a bit. You being a Falcons fan, obviously in the same division. How much do you think Sam Darnold can improve this team moving forward?
Well, it's interesting because I was also pretty high on Teddy Bridgewater coming into the season, and I thought he was going to be a really nice fit for them, kind of as a stopgap kind of quarterback. I obviously didn't think he was going to be a long-term solution or anything, but I thought he was going to do a good job, and he performed pretty admirably. My question kind of is how much better will Sam Darnold make the Panthers over what Teddy Bridgewater gave them last year? If you're high on Sam Darnold, and I think I probably kind of am. I think there's still something there. I think he can kind of help them a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know if this is a long-term solution. But I think if you're the Panthers, they would probably looking at the draft board, and I think this goes to a broader question that we were talking about before the show of what are the 49ers going to do at number 3? I think this almost signals that okay, maybe they kind of knew maybe they were going with one of Fields or Trey Lance, and they're not comfortable taking Mac Jones at 8. I mean, we did our mock draft, and I said it in our mock draft. I personally would not take Mac Jones at 8. I think that's far too high. I think you can get him much later in the first round if you're a quarterback needy team like the Steelers, maybe the Saints, something like that. But if you're the Carolina Panthers, you need to add more talent to the roster and not just reach for need at a quarterback at Mac Jones, who might not improve you that much at all. I think Sam Darnold is probably around the same, he'll probably give him the same impact, maybe even a little bit better than Mac Jones. I think you put him in this draft class, he'd probably rank a little higher than Mac Jones, but I'm not sure how much better this makes the Panthers. I think Joe Brady's going to help him a lot, but it's almost like a lateral move to me.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I do think, Teddy Bridgewater's had such an interesting career, obviously going to Minnesota, gets into the playoffs, has the horrible, horrible injury. He was in New York for a little bit and then goes to the Saints and then gets that big payday with the Panthers. And it was kind of just consistently mediocre play, a few decent throws here and there, a few really questionable throws. I do think there is a little bit higher of an upside with Darnold just because, one, he's younger, and there's still that question mark of, he was in a terrible offense with terrible weapons. What is going to happen now that he was a really, decently high recruit, obviously a top 3 pick? Can he show, and live up to where he was drafted? But I do think Carolina is going to look later in this draft and take another quarterback, whether it be a Davis Mills, or a Kellen Mond, or like you mentioned, a Kyle Trask, something like that. Because if this situation doesn't work, you're hitting the panic button. Luca, obviously you've seen Sam Darnold firsthand, you being a Pats fan. That was the team that he said he, claimed to be seeing ghosts out there. Mm-hmm. What do you think about Darnold to the Panthers?
I mean, I like the upside, like you guys were saying, but I don't know how much better it makes Carolina. I think looking at it from Carolina's perspective, they're probably thinking all the quarterbacks in the division, Brady's probably towards the end of his career. I mean, unless he wants to play till 55, you never know with Tom Brady. Matt Ryan and the Falcons, Bradshaw, are they going to replace him this year? Are they not? And then the Saints, they're kind of up in the air. We know Sean Payton loves Taysom Hill, so we don't know what's going on there. So for them, it's about getting – I guess their quarterback they think could be there for the next 5 years. They got a step on everybody else in the division. I think Sam Darnold, the situation in New York is unfortunate because I think he was doomed from the start. I don't think they did a lot of great things around him. And I think now you're putting him in a Joe Brady offense with Matt Rule. They've shown some promise. You got McCaffrey locked up. You already mentioned the weapons. He reunites with Robbie Anderson. They were a pretty good deep threat in New York. I mean, the little sprouts that we saw from them was pretty good. So I think reuniting him would be better. I would have liked to see Carolina make this move before free agency. Know what you have and then build around him. And now going into the draft, you can get whatever a need that you may not have gone in free agency. Now it's kind of a question. They could probably trade back and get some more picks to build around Darnold. But you can't have a situation like New York, guys, because if you put Sam Darnold in the exact same situation, you don't adjust the offensive line and it just gets worse and worse and worse. He might be one of those quarterbacks where it's like, what if this, what if this? But you can't make excuses for him because he does have the weapons around him. The defenses, they're okay. So if they can address that in the draft, I think it's a favorable situation for Sam Darnold, and time is running out if he can't make it work here.
Jeff, if you can, touch on this situation, but also maybe allude to Teddy Bridgewater. What's next for him as well? You know, your Chicago Bears, they ended up going with Andy Dalton. That could potentially be a good fit for Teddy as well.
Yeah, I mean, with Darnold, I think I've been one of the people that has kind of like, you know, vouched for him in a sense that like, it's like obviously number one, the talent around him is really just not there. But I think even more importantly, with Adam Gase being there for those last couple of years in New York, it was just a brutal time for him. He's a guy who just has been probably one of the worst coaches in NFL history, at least in the last decade. I don't think there's anybody who's been worse than him. There's been nobody that makes anybody just look awful like he can. So, I mean, for Darnold, it's like, man, like, I don't know. I think I see a little bit in him. And it's funny because I actually really was not high on him coming up into the draft. But, you know, he's converted some of this stuff into the NFL. He's shown some flashes. He's been able to do it at this high level. So I kind of agree with you guys that, like, I don't know how much further this takes them. I mean, maybe Joe Brady and the offense is good enough to get him over that hump. And maybe he actually will be at the very least a decent quarterback. Maybe he is just that slight step up from Teddy Bridgewater. But I think for me, the biggest issue with it is just the overpay. Like, it's just way too many picks. I mean, yeah, sure, the second rounders next year, but to me, I don't think he was really worth that based on what he had shown overall in the NFL. As for Bridgewater himself, I mean, he's kind of in a tough spot, man. Like, you know, he was just given a big money contract, and it's like, okay, so how do the Panthers really get rid of him? And then, you know, who's going to take him and pay that much money and give him a starting job? It's probably not going to happen. I'll be honest with you. I think he's kind of doomed as a backup for the rest of his career. And it's too bad because I do like Teddy Bridgewater, but at the same time, I mean, I think a lot of teams are really, you know, not just open, but they understand the need of a backup quarterback because you never know when that guy's going to go down. And Bridgewater for sure can be a good backup quarterback with some good talent around him. We saw in New Orleans, and I think we saw flashes of it here in Carolina, but I think for now, he's going to be staying put in Carolina for at least this year. And then I think we'll know a little bit more in the next year.
I do think with Sam Darnold, the situation for Carolina is they were kind of stuck. I think, Bradshaw, you kind of mentioned that a little bit too, is they're at 8. No way Atlanta's going to trade with them unless they give them 4 first-round picks or something crazy, right? Maybe they don't like Mac Jones, which is fair. And then I remember in earlier shows, I said, you know, Carolina, you got to go out and get Deshaun Watson. The situation right now, no one wants to trade for Deshaun Watson. We don't even know if he's going to step on the football field again, right? So they were in that tough position, and I think they're too talented on offense, and they're an improving defense. They can't just tank and go, let's go get Spencer Rattler. I think take the chance. If Sam Darnold has a pretty decent year, there's that 5th-year option, and after that, you're not signing him to a $30 million per year deal, right? You could get something in the middle there and help this team move further. And also, at that number 8 selection, you're not like pushing and reaching for a Mac Jones. You're going to be taking a Kyle Pitts, a Devonta Smith if you want, or you get the best defensive player available, or maybe Rashawn Slater, Penei Sewell, something like that. So I do think draft-wise for that first-round selection, this is the perfect situation for Carolina, obviously unless a Justin Fields falls to them or something like that at 8. But I guess that's the Sam Darnold situation. We're going to see how it plays out, right? I do, you know, he was given a terrible deck in hand of card story, and you know, Adam Gase, it was a mess. So I do hope he improves his game a little bit, and I think we will see that. This is going to be his best year yet, in my opinion, at least. Having a DJ Moore, having a Robbie Anderson, maybe getting a Kyle Pitts, right? So, and obviously McCaffrey in the backfield helps too a little bit. But Let's move on, right? Robbie Anderson, he has been sort of a hidden gem in the NFL, obviously a late round pick himself. Let's talk about guys in this 2021 class that could be that moving forward, right? We're obviously not going to be giving you guys who might sneak into the first round and say, hey, here's the guy. These are going to be guys maybe in that third, fourth, fifth round, like an Alvin Kamara, something like that, where they're going to end up being a phenomenal player in the league. So let's go to Luca. Who do you have on your board that you think is going to end up being a star?
I think there's a lot of guys that go under the radar. I think the NFL, of all sports, you can find guys later in the draft. It's such a big roster spot, right? Guys, like you can have guys undrafted and they become stars. I think Milton Williams from Louisiana Tech, I think is one of those guys I look at, and I felt like a scout here. Okay. I was watching some film on the guy. And when I watch film, okay, I look at it and I'm like, okay, like what can you do right here? What can you do wrong here? There's not a lot of games to tell, right? He can have a one-off game here or there. But what I noticed consistently is his first step, getting off the ball. And we know it's such a big thing in the NFL. If you're even a half a second late, they can completely take you out of the play. We talked about pro day combine numbers and how we don't think it'll translate, but he was a freak. He had a great combine showing, 38 shuffle, it was like 4 seconds or something crazy like that, 34 bench reps. It was just, he's explosive. He could be explosive. So I think you put him in the right system. I'm looking at a team like maybe like a Seattle. They do a pretty good job developing defensive players. They need guys on the D-line, it seems, every single year. Maybe he can slip to them. They don't have a lot of picks in this draft, but maybe they can use one on him. I think if you put him in the right system, give him some more time to develop, and he acquires that first step, he's not going to be double teamed like he does. He's the best player on the defense at Louisiana Tech. So most likely he's not going to be double teamed when he goes to the NFL. If he can just fix that first step, I think he could be a pretty impactful player and uses a good depth guy before it becomes a starter in this league.
I think Milton Williams on my defensive tackle, prospects, I think he was in my top 5. So that'd be phenomenal if a team like Seattle, who only has 3 picks in this draft, could go out and get him. Jeff, what about you, man?
I like a guy like Tutu Atwell, especially because I think he's actually going to slip a lot further down now because of his pro day numbers with I think it was a 4.44. And I think we all assumed he would kind of run in around like the mid 4.3s, right? I think that is more or less, if you were to kind of put a number on it, that's how fast he is. And I think coaches and scouts will make this continuous mistake of looking at that number and thinking that's who he is. And I don't think that's who he is. Obviously, when you're running against guys that are going to be much slower than you in college, of course there's concerns, but like when you see him separate people, like there's nobody near him on the screen. Like when they're watching him just run all the way into the end zone for a touchdown, there is no one near him. Right. Like, Jalen Waddle, I think, was a fast guy too, but sometimes, there would be guys kind of close to him. They'd be in frame. Atwell, nobody's in frame. So at the very least, you've got a very good, speedy guy that I think has really good vision. And, we're seeing more in the NFL, like guys are starting to, including myself included, because I doubted this for a long time, kind of that ball carrying ability, that elusiveness that Tutu Atwell really has, that sort of thing that's kind of hard to quantify. I think he really has that. Yes, there's definitely going to be tons of concerns about his size. He's a small guy, whether it be like, the height in terms of jump balls or just his ability to hold up. For me, it's not really a concern at all. I mean, hey, you know what? We're going to see, aren't we? We're going to see if he can actually hold up in the NFL. Let's trust him. Let's trust the upside, especially with a late round pick. He reminds me a lot of, shorter guys like Gabriel. Oh my gosh. Taylor Gabriel. I mean, even just like Darnell Mooney, that's what I was thinking of. Darnell Mooney, a guy who slipped way down in the draft for the Bears, and he's become a really good player. I think he's, going to end up being one of those guys who was a massive steal in this draft because he's going to improve a lot, and he didn't really get to show it either. So I think Atwell is one of those guys. I think, especially we were talking about it last week as well, you can get receivers late. So he seems like a perfect guy to me to slip down late and someone to pick him up.
And I think with him, he would be a perfect number 2 in the right offense, right? He has that similar skill set to obviously Bradshaw is one of his former favorite players, Tavon Austin, where these kind of shorter guys who have the speed aren't maybe meant to be a number 1. The only guy I can think of right now who is quick and a true number 1 receiver is Tyreek Hill, right? everybody keeps comping these, really quick, speedy guys as a Tyreek Hill. Nobody's going to be that right away, right? So I think if he could fit in an offense, be a number 2, he was on Daniel Jeremiah's, 1.0 mock draft. We saw the pro day. He's fallen way off. In recent mock drafts, he's getting, mocked in the 6th, 7th round. So, Jeff, I think you're absolutely right. He could end up being a true steal, especially if he's in the right situation. Bradshaw, what about you? Who do you have now?
Well, you shouted out one of my guys, Tavon Austin from West Virginia, and I'm gonna stick with West Virginia. And you'll call me a little biased if you want, but I watched this guy for 2 years dominate in the backfield. Darius Stills, the defensive tackle, nose tackle even for West Virginia. I watched him for 2 years as a starter, and the guy just lived in the backfield. And he played in the Big 12, which is a historically crazy offensive conference in the NCAA. And West Virginia's defense was anchored by Darius Stills. He was a consensus All-American, the first one they had since 2006. He's so explosive getting off the ball. He plays a little undisciplined. He's a little undersized. I believe he actually measured under 6'1". I think he's around 6 foot, 280-ish pounds. But he lived in the backfield. And, like, I watched that production and I saw him do all this, like, throughout his 2 years as a starter. And it's so hard for me to believe that he will not be an impactful player in the NFL, going up against really great prospects in the Big 12 and go up against really great offenses. He shuts down the run. He didn't do a ton pass rushing, but he was a nose tackle. So he's getting like double and triple teamed when he had to. He was the best defensive lineman on that team. It's hard for me to believe that he's not going to be an impactful player in the NFL, even as an undersized defensive lineman. But yeah, Darius Stills, like, call me biased if you want to, but I watched him for 2 years just dominating. And I don't know. I find it hard to believe he's going to be anything but impactful.
I think we kind of underestimate these guys who are, in the middle on that defensive line, who are undersized and maybe not the prototypical, size and weight. Guess who was a player who was a little bit undersized but dominated at the college level? Aaron Donald, right? And obviously worked out well for him. Obviously, I'm not going to comparing Milton Williams. And
I'll compare Darius Stills to Aaron Donald. God damn it! No, I won't do that.
I do think that some of these guys can succeed, and it obviously is going to depend where you line them up too on that D line. For me, there was a few different guys in this class who I think could really be impactful where they get selected. I'm going to go Demetric Felton though. Ended up getting a lot of buzz after the Senior Bowl. He's going to end up being a wide receiver, but at UCLA played a little bit of running back and a bit of receiver. If you look at, I believe 2019, only 330 yards on the ground, 600 as a receiver. And then in 2020, it switches, right? 700 on the ground and only 200, receiving yards. But he can do it all. We saw, at the Senior Bowl, he was dominating guys. Terrific route runner, very clean, very crisp, a little bit undersized, but he has that breakaway speed as well, which you love to see out of a back. I'm not saying he's going to be a Kamara or a McCaffrey, but I think in the right situation, if you take him the 4th round, I think he could really help a team out as that gadget type of player, even if he's just in the slot, or even like a Curtis Samuel, who we just saw got paid, is going to be heading to Washington. He can do those things, right? Which could really help an offense and make them that much better. So that would be my gem. Those are all of our gems for the 2021 NFL Draft. Guys, that's going to do it. A quick, speedy episode, but we touched on quite a bit. Obviously, Sam Darnold trade. We're going to see what happens there and some gems. Obviously, we'll get to some more topics later in the coming weeks, maybe another mock draft, maybe talk on some more trade rumors and stuff like that heading into the draft. Who's going to trade up with the Atlanta Falcons? Bradshaw's team says they are comfortable moving back, but maybe do they take that quarterback to replace Matt Ryan? We'll get to all of that in the coming weeks. This is the Cover 4 podcast. That's Bradshaw. That's Jeff. That is Luca, and I'm Nolan. We'll see you guys soon.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please drop a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Lingo Sports and Lingo News for a whole lot more just like this.